joint public hearing on H.R. 2638, the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act, is now open. I want to thank everyone for attending today's hearing. Some of the nation's most pristine lands are found in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The region is home to the grizzly bear and a host of other game animals and fowl. H.R. 2638 would create 16.5 million acres of wilderness on public lands in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. This bill has raised some very interesting proposals that I believe deserve our attention, such as biological connecting corridors, which will allow wildlife to travel between various ecosystems, and the disposition of remaining roadless areas held in the public trust. The subcommittees are pleased to have the bill's sponsor with us, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. I look forward to your testimony and the testimony of all of today's witnesses. It's my hope that this hearing will further the ongoing debate on ecosystem protection and add to this very important shift in the management of our national forests. Pleased now to ask my colleague from Massachusetts, the chairman of the Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee, Honorable Chairman Studs, who came to Congress at the same time I did several years ago, if he has any opening statement.
You had to remind them of that, didn't you? Thank you, Mr. Chairman and venerable colleague. I echo your remarks. I commend the gentlewoman from New York. This is a highly imaginative, innovative, downright daring proposition. It is clear that these areas are extraordinarily valuable. In many respects, they're unique. They're home to many an endangered and threatened critter. It's also clear that the odds are high indeed, as the gentlewoman knows, with regard to this legislation. The interesting thing about the critters out there is that they seem to have less respect than we for lines that we draw on maps. We in this town cannot function without lines on maps. And actually, most of the rest of the country is the same way. But it's amazing that the wildlife of the land has precious little respect for those lines and ignores them regularly. Whether or not we can reconcile our differing approaches to those lines, I don't know. But I do know that this legislation has precipitated what I think is a very healthy debate on a topic that is enormously important. And I commend the gentlewoman and those who have fought so hard for it. I apologize. As I think you know, have 11 1/2 simultaneous conflicts and will not be able to stay. But I wanted to express my appreciation and respect for those of you who are putting forth this proposition. It is one that deserves to be heard, and I'm sure that the record developed today will be a very valuable contribution. I thank the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Ravenel, for any opening comments he'd like to make. Okay. Young lady from California, Ms. Eshu, for any opening comments you'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I couldn't mean that more to Chairman Rose and to the chairman of the committee that I'm a member of, Merchant Marine and Fisheries, for holding this joint hearing today. I want to welcome all of the distinguished panelists, including, of course, my colleague Carolyn Maloney and Carol King, who have both worked very, very hard on this critical issue. I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act. The areas included in this bill are some of the largest remaining tracts of native forest and biodiversity in the Northern Rockies. Their ecosystems are home to grizzly bears, gray wolves, woodland caribou, salmon and trout, bald eagles, and many more species. Unfortunately, these unique and pristine areas are in great danger because of poor land management practices and unabated development, which threaten to strip the land of its trees, waters, and animals. The Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act, I believe, will protect these beautiful areas for our children and theirs. The bill provides for an ecosystem-based approach, which we now know is the best way to preserve wildlife populations and avert train wrecks like those that have occurred in the Pacific Northwest. The bill is supported by over 320 organizations and businesses nationwide and is backed by world-renowned biologists and sportsman groups. Again, I thank both of the chairmen for holding this hearing today. I think that this will develop a valuable record for our colleagues to review, and I look forward to hearing the testimony from our distinguished guests as long as I can stay here. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to submit this for the record.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a great pleasure for me to be here today with my colleagues from both the Merchant Marine and the Agricultural Committees to hear testimony on this very important issue. I, along with other members from the Merchant Marine Committee, requested that Chairman Studs hold this hearing so that we could be better educated about the unique approach of this legislation. Historically, wilderness designation has occurred on a state-by-state basis. This bill, however, looks at a whole ecosystem approach and 5 different states, one of which, of course, is Oregon. And Mr. Chairman, we hear a lot of talk about ecosystem management these days, but actually we know very little about what it means to implement it. So I look forward to the testimony. I appreciate your allowing me to be here, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to working on this very important issue. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. We are very happy at this time to welcome the original co-sponsor of this bill, Congresswoman Carolyn B. Maloney, 14th District of New York, to our hearing, and we're happy to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank you very, very much for holding this hearing, and likewise, Chairman Studs. Since I first introduced this bill, it has attracted 58 co-sponsors from over 20 states. It has been endorsed by the Sierra Club because it makes good sense environmentally, and the National Taxpayers Union has noted the good sense it makes economically. It has deep and strong support in the areas affected by the legislation. Hundreds of organizations representing businesses and small property owners have expressed their support. To this date, this bill is specifically supported by individuals and organizations representing over 5 million people in America, so far and counting. Yesterday, I received a letter which eloquently sums up the reasons for all this support. The writer, former President Jimmy Carter, has asked me to include his statement in my testimony. With your permission, may I make his letter a part of the permanent record?
Without objection.
And add just one paragraph, and I quote from him directly. Perhaps the most important factor to consider is that NREPA has the strong support of the American people who own these public lands at a time when only 5% of America's original pristine forests still remain. It is our duty and obligation to protect and restore these national treasures as we have enjoyed them and been sustained by them physically, mentally, and spiritually, end quote. Mr. Chairman, when I was younger, I was thrilled and inspired to visit some of the great forests of the Northern Rockies. Tragically, however, I can't show these forests to my children today because they no longer can be seen. The rapid depletion of forests disturbs me. I recognize that America needs lumber, and there are many jobs that depend upon industries like timber and mining, but it is woefully simplistic to think of wilderness protection as jobs versus trees. We all recognize and agree that as far as logging on federal lands goes, it only provides jobs because the government and the taxpayers provide millions and millions of dollars of subsidy to the timber industry. In the forests covered in this legislation, according to the Congressional Budget Office, federal expenditures exceed receipts by a 3-to-1 ratio, even when federal road building is excluded. These forests are money losers. Ultimately, it's by the sufferance of all American taxpayers that logging can continue in these particular federal forests. The question that the subsidy really raises is this: should all American taxpayers be subsidizing the destruction of publicly owned forest? At what point do we say that the remaining untouched wilderness is too valuable to allow Japan to turn it into plywood? Many scientists argue that further logging of these roadless roads at present rates will result in irreparable damage to our remaining populations of mammals, fish, and birds, to our pristine rivers and streams, and to our unique old-growth forest. Mr. Chairman, I tend to agree with that overwhelming independent scientific opinion. I believe that our management policies should be guided by the need for preservation rather than by the small possibility that all of these scientists may be wrong. It was for these underlying reasons that I introduced H.R. 2638. Let me briefly discuss some of the things that NREPA would and wouldn't do if it were enacted. First and foremost, the bill does not change the status of a single acre of private or state-owned land. It only deals with federal land, which is held in trust by the government for the benefit of all Americans. NREPA would not designate lands that are currently open to timber and mining. Now, since the legislation was introduced last July, some of the exact boundaries of the roadless areas may have changed slightly. It is important to note that this bill deals with only a small percentage of the total number of western forests. We are truly speaking about a negligible percentage of the U.S. timber industry. But though we are discussing only a small percentage of U.S. timber production, I do not mean to diminish the scope of the legislation. NREPA will designate over 16 million acres of new wilderness, but most of the land is not suitable for timber harvest or mining. In fact, according to Dr. Thomas Power, the chairman of the Department of Economics at the University of Montana, only 20% of the land designated in NREPA is suitable for timber harvest. But let's now talk about...
Can I interrupt you a minute?
Sure.
20%, Power, the chairman of the Department of Economics, University of Montana, says only 20% of the land designated by this bill is suitable for timber harvest?
That is correct.
And how many acres are in the bill? 16 million?
16 million.
So we're talking about roughly 3.2 million suitable for harvest. Thank you. Go ahead.
NREPA will protect the habitat of the only woodland caribou herd in the continental United States. The woodland caribou has been described by some scientists as the most endangered mammal in the continental U.S. NREPA will protect the rivers and streams that are the last habitats for many of America's wild trout stocks. NREPA will establish a program to help rehabilitate the Snake River, which has been called one of the most environmentally threatened rivers in America. And most importantly, NREPA attempts to emphasize that all of these places, all of these forests are linked together in the most vital ways possible. The best scientific minds in the nation increasingly tell us that you can't realistically try and protect these unique lands and everything that lives within them without thinking of the entire ecosystem. In order to make wilderness protection work, you need to protect enough land to sustain the animals and plants that live within them. And sometimes those biological boundaries cross the political boundaries and state boundaries that we've established. It would be wonderful if we could teach an eagle in a tree in Montana that you are not supposed to fly over to the tree in Idaho. But animals and plant life recognize natural boundaries. So this legislation seeks to accomplish the goal of protecting enough land to sustain the plant and animal populations, the pure streams and rivers that currently exist in the 5 states. In bringing this legislation before Congress, I'm proud to follow in the tradition of New Yorkers like Theodore Roosevelt, who gave America the first national forest system. And also in the tradition of Mo Udall, who lived as far away from the Alaska wilderness his legislation protected as I do from the public lands designated in 2638. By having this hearing, I believe we are continuing in that tradition, and I hope we will continue to debate these issues in a thoughtful and responsible way. If nothing else, the American people should take comfort in the fact that we are debating how much land to protect instead of whether to protect land at all. 2 supporters of NREPA who live in Manhattan, Montana, that is, wrote to me and said, and I quote, "We feel that there is a little ray of hope for the incredible but dwindling wild lands we are so lucky to live near and love. We all have a responsibility to sustain that hope." I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to be here and for having this hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good statement. Congresswoman Elizabeth First was recognized for an opening statement. Do you have any additional testimony you'd like to give at this time? Okay. Gentleman from South Carolina. Gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Smith.
I thank the chairman's courtesy for allowing me to sit, and although I'm not a member of this subcommittee, I appreciate that very much. I have an opening statement, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to offer for the record. I just want to make a couple of comments, if I may.
Just kind of keep it, 5 minutes, we'd be very happy.
Oh, well, it won't take me that long,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman. I know your reputation, so I've scaled it down.
We'll be very fair.
All right.
We know you're a good man of interest in this area, and we're glad you're here. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I am interested, Mr. Chairman, and obviously one of the areas of the gentlelady's legislation affects Hell's Canyon, which is in Oregon and is in my district. The facts are that most of Oregon is already protected by the great hand of Father, Uncle Sam. In fact, about 85% of the timber harvest in my state has been eliminated through Option 9 and other Forest Service examples. Hell's Canyon now is in a national recreation area, fully protected from any onslaught of even Manhattan people from the Midwest or the West. But the point is that we want to transfer through this bill authority from one government agency to another. And when we begin to transfer to the national park system, I think everybody understands that you're transferring to a system that's broke, or certainly is way behind. A backlog, for instance, in the Park Service of $5.6 billion for construction projects, a backlog of $400 million in operating funds, a backlog of $1.2 million in acquisition of land already authorized by this Congress and others. So to place another 16 million acres of land under the Park Service is doing an injustice to the land because it can't afford to operate it. I took the trouble to take a look at New York City, for instance. In fact, in New York, there's a lawsuit on right now, but everybody agrees it's going to cost millions to refurbish the leaking roof and the urine-stained walls at Grant's Tomb. Now, there's a backlog in New York City, in the lady's own area, of $230 million. Now, I am interested in helping her. I want to help fund the backlog in New York City before she extends her great hand of gratitude to the West and to Hell's Canyon. In fact, many people may support this, but let's take a look at local people. Loudoun County, the little county that Hell's Canyon is in, by a resolution and a vote, 94% of the people opposed a national park. The counties around them oppose a national park. So I'm here to reflect the views of a person who lives within this area, Mr. Chairman, who is reflecting the views of the people that I represent. And I want to help New York City by funding $230 million of backlog. I thank the gentleman for his kindness.
Let me ask you a question. Does this cover part of what's your congressional district?
Yes, it does, sir.
How many acres roughly would you guess?
Hell's Canyon, about I'm told 700,000 acres.
Okay. But these are all, of course, federally owned lands.
The federally owned lands in a national recreation area at the time, so designated.
Maintained by who?
Maintained by the Forest Service, operated and maintained by the Forest Service.
And it would transfer this
to the Parks Department.
Okay. And you think that's a bad idea because, I mean, I understand, I'm trying to get at the monetary argument. You were saying they're broke?
The Park Service, Mr. Chairman, in the current position, has a backlog of $5.6 billion of construction projects. Now, these are their figures, already authorized by the Congress, unfunded. A backlog of $400 million in operating funds. We can't operate the parks we have. We're way behind in operating funds appropriated, and $1.2 million in acquisition backlog. So what you're saying here...
Would there be acquisition costs or operating funds for this?
There would be operating funds, obviously. And...
but I mean, nothing like, for a wilderness area, operating funds wouldn't be anything like they would be for a park, would they?
No, but this is these national recreation areas, some of them, many of them are operating tourism opportunities. So there are construction projects that may be necessary. There certainly are operating funds that you must transfer from the Forest Service to the Parks Department if you're going to do justice to them at all.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions? Mr. Volkmer?
Other witness?
Yes.
I would just like to ask the gentlelady how much time in the last several years has she spent in the various states that are
As I said in my testimony, I was there as a young woman many years ago. I was there as a young woman many years ago, and many of the forests that I saw then have been destroyed.
See. And the next question I have, I understand the gentlelady from Oregon who's here supports the legislation. What other members from the states that are involved support the legislation?
We have 58 co-sponsors from 20 different states.
No, I asked
And we
Montana.
have over 5 million supporters, many of whom are from the affected states, and we can submit to the record those list of names.
Well, I'd like to ask you again. Does anybody from Montana support the bill?
Not to my knowledge.
You mean any member?
Idaho, members of the House.
Members of the House.
Idaho.
We have a resolution in support of it from a city council from the state of Montana, the county of Missoula, city of Missoula,
No, I didn't ask that
in
question.
support of the legislation.
My question, ma'am, is what members of the House from the state of Idaho support this legislation?
No one. As I said, 5 million organizations and individuals that have signed in support of the legislation.
Right.
So the Sierra Club supports it, and the National Taxpayers Union support it. So the support for it is deep and very strong. There is a great deal of support for this legislation from not only the scientific community, but from people who live and work there and care about the region.
Well, there's probably one area in this legislation that you and I might agree on, and that is that there needs to be an ecosystem approach to the management of our national forests. Now, I came to that conclusion before you ever got to this Congress. I want you to know that.
I'm glad to hear that.
There are other people within the Forest Service that have come to this conclusion about 5 years ago, and they have started an ecosystem approach to management. My next question is, have you discussed this legislation, what you're proposing here, with a gentleman by the name of Jack Ward Thomas?
I have discussed it with the National Forest Service.
No, I asked if you discussed it with
With
Jack
whom?
Ward Thomas.
Jack Warden Thomas? No, who is Jack Warden Thomas?
That's what I thought. That's just what I thought. Jack Ward Thomas is a chief of the National Forest Service. Jack
I've
Ward
discussed it with
Thomas.
several people who work for him.
Jack Ward Thomas is a person that started, I guess, most of the people in this country, in government at least, on the road to an ecosystem approach to management of our national forests, and it's precipitated by the spotted owl controversy in Oregon, Northern California, and the state of Washington. I and other members of the former subcommittee on forest and national energy, et cetera, of this committee, the Agriculture Committee, along with the gentleman from Oregon, had worked for several years, and this is not the first legislation that's ever been introduced for proposing an ecosystem management approach to our national forest, because this gentleman actually introduced and got out of this Congress, out of this House, this committee, excuse me, and to the floor, but was never taken up on the floor because of opposition from the chairman of the Interior Committee. We never got it going because the Interior Committee didn't report their bill out. Happened to do with Regions 5 and 6 of our national forests. That legislation did approach and did call for an ecosystem management approach for the national forests in Region 5 and 6. Do you know where Regions 5 and 6 are?
And the Northern Rockies.
Northern California, Oregon, and Washington. That's correct. Now, some of us feel very strongly that we need to do what some of us propose and have been trying to do for several years, and I don't disagree with you on that. I agree with you. I disagree as to the approach that is being taken by this legislation and not trying to work with others within the system who have come to the same conclusion in attempting to bring about a ecosystem management to our national forest.
Well, it depends how you define an ecosystem management. You can call it clear cut. I believe that bill supported clear cutting, and we are for maintaining the ecosystem, not for clear cuts. And we met with the National Forest Service, and they submitted testimony earlier, and they claim they do not support this bill, that they feel that the present system is fine, and that we should follow state boundaries. That was earlier.
Well, I agree.
The Forest Service called clear cuts temporary meadows.
I'd have to agree with the Forest Service as far as opposition to this legislation. And I quite agree that it can be done in other ways and better ways than this legislation.
Well, that is what we're having now, is a debate and a discussion on the last remaining forests in America, federal forests.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I yield to the gentlelady from Oregon, I want to observe that I did not realize, as you said in your testimony, I'm proud to follow the tradition of New Yorkers like Theodore Roosevelt, who gave America its first national forest system. Was he one of the original?
Yes, he proposed it.
Okay. And then you mentioned Mo Udall, who lived as far away from Alaska wilderness that his legislation protected as you do from this area.
Yes.
Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Gentlelady from Oregon is recognized.
Well, I just wanted to respond a little bit. I'm so pleased that you also support Chief Thomas. I think he's an outstanding scientist. But I did just want to say that I think although some members have not co-sponsored this legislation, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't support it. I'm not a co-sponsor of this legislation myself either, so, but I think that the support might be there, whether the co-sponsorship is not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just have one question for Ms. Maloney. Can you tell me what becomes of the private property owners who caught in these biological connecting corridors that
Well, number one,
established to allow wildlife to travel?
we are only talking about federal lands. It does not take any private land at all. And that is totally, the vast majority of the corridor area is federal land. Some areas are privately owned, but these owners do not have to comply if they do not wish to. The bill explicitly states that the management direction established by this section shall apply only to lands administered by the United States Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This bill will not take any private property rights. Major highways and private roads are expressly exempted from this section and will not be affected. So it does not affect private property at all.
Thank you.
It is only federal land owned by the federal government, by all American citizens.
Gentleman from South Carolina.
Ms. Maloney, since the issue of Hell's Canyon has been raised, can you tell us, and of course I'm a co-sponsor of the legislation, can you tell us what significant changes would occur in that area?
The Hell's Canyon area includes the Hell's Canyon National Recreation Area, and a recent General Accounting Office report showed that the Hell's Canyon NRA is severely mismanaged, and a change in management agency would, I believe, more properly protect this national treasure that has outstanding park values. And that's why it's a study. It's a study. It's not a an official move. It's a park study.
Okay. Gentleman, South Carolina has the time. Would you yield?
That's a yielded from Oregon.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. One of the battles we've had with the whole question of funding for recreation areas and national parks is the priority of funds. In Hell's Canyon, some may say it's mismanaged, but that denies the fact that the Forest Service for the last 15 years has had in their budget requests for funds to upgrade the management of the NRA. Always has been stricken out by Congress. So to say that the NRA in Hell's Canyon is mismanaged is to blame the Congress, because we have been applying for years, as have many of these other parks in New York, all around the country. Parks have been applying for funds that aren't funded. The Forest Service has been applying for funds that were never given. So I think it's a wrong direction to castigate the Forest Service, since really the Congress has not come up with the funding to properly manage the NRA at Hell's Canyon.
Thank the gentleman for his contribution. I want to thank the gentlelady from New York for her testimony, and we hope you'll stay with us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You are very welcome, and I hope you can stay with us the remainder of the hearing, if possible. Our second set of witnesses is a panel composed of Mr. Mark Reimers, the Deputy Chief for Legislation, the Forest Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington, D.C., Mr. James W. Stewart, the Assistant Director for Planning, National Park Service, Department of Interior, Washington, D.C. Now, my staff is a little concerned, Mr. Reimers, that we've had a very hard time getting testimony from you folks on time. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I'm aware of that, and I apologize.
Well, how many times have you apologized now? Is this the fourth or the fifth time, Mr. Reimers?
This is the first time I've personally done it, but I am aware that our other testimony has been late to this committee.
Would you look into that?
Yes, I will.
Okay. I'm not saying we're going to have 4 strikes and you're out, or 3 strikes and you're out, but, you know, we deserve to have your testimony in time for the staff and members who want to take a look at it. And I'm going to take your word on the record that you'll look into it and please see that it doesn't happen again.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You may proceed.
I'll just highlight my testimony since you have it before you. I appreciate the opportunity to present the views of the Department of Agriculture concerning H.R. 2638, the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act of 1993. The Department of Agriculture recommends that H.R. 2638 not be enacted. As has already been discussed and is indicated in my testimony, it would involve considerable designations of wilderness, of wild and scenic rivers, and a number of other provisions of the bill that have been previously discussed. As has been acknowledged by some of the members, H.R. 2638 is a very ambitious bill, and it represents a dramatic departure from previous approaches to wilderness and special area designations. As you're aware and has been discussed, led by the congressional delegations of affected states, the state-by-state approach to wilderness designation used since our Rare 2 studies has provided an important local and national perspective. The Forest Service role has been to provide information concerning the resource trade-offs and other management implications of potential wilderness designations. Statewide wilderness bills have already been enacted in Wyoming, Oregon, and Washington, involved considerable discussion in each of those states. The Montana and Idaho delegations are currently working on statewide bills for their respective states. And as you'll recall, this committee, or the full committee, reported out the Montana bill last week. Using this deliberate process has resulted in a high-quality national wilderness preservation system which enjoys the support of both local and national interests. As part of the forest planning process, the Forest Service makes recommendations on wilderness. After nearly 16 years of work on the Montana wilderness issue by the Montana delegation, a bill of about 1.7 million acres of wilderness designation has been ordered reported by the Committees of Agriculture and Natural Resources. H.R. 2638 proposes about doubling the acreage for wilderness designation, plus an additional 2.4 million acres of wilderness associated with biologically connected corridors for Montana. H.R. 2638 appears to bypass existing processes and laws. This bill would set aside the National Forest Management Act process and the outcomes which strive to strike a balance between preservation and development. This would mean that efforts to develop forest plans in consultation with the public would be set aside in favor of the approach taken by the bill. We acknowledge and share some of the concerns of the proponents of this bill. These concerns that our management experience have led us towards the ecosystem management approach being pursued by the Forest Service. The Chief of the Forest Service has stated that one of his primary goals is to quickly and effectively implement ecosystem management in the National Forest. We have initiated several broad-scale assessments as a means to strengthen forest plans and have used this approach in developing the President's Forest Plan for the Pacific Northwest and for addressing concerns over salmon in the West Coast river systems, commonly referred to as pack fish. We believe the concept of biologically connecting corridors is best considered in the context of land management planning process. In that process, you need to look at a number of considerations. In dealing with biological connecting corridors, some questions we face include what corridor dimensions and conditions are necessary to serve the needs of particular species? What kinds of treatments and activities are compatible with the purposes of any corridor? Do the corridors materially enhance the survivability of stressed wildlife populations? And so as we look at the characteristics of species or habitat, it's important to see it in a broader context than just designated biological corridors. It's important to see it in the context of not only the entire national forest, but composites of national forests. In summary, we find this bill seems to disregard previous legislation of the Congress. As such, it would circumvent the processes set in motion by existing law that address the complex issues of wilderness, ecosystem protection, biological diversity, and other management issues not easily resolved. This bill would ignore the processes of forest planning, wild and scenic river study and designation, and research in its application to management issues. That concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chief Mark Reimers. I believe you're accompanied by Mr. James Stewart, Assistant Director of Planning. Mr. Stewart, we'll be happy to hear from you now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate being here before these two committees, members, and visitors from other members of Congress. I have with me this morning Mr. Keith Korgall, who is with the Bureau of Land Management and can speak to any Bureau issues on wilderness. The department recommends that H.R. 2638 not be enacted. Because this bill would affect primarily lands administered by the U.S. Forest Service, we would generally defer to their remarks on the views on the bill. The areas identified in Section 6 for study as possible national parks and preserve are the Hells Canyon Chief Joseph National Park and Preserve and the Flathead National Park and Preserve. These areas undoubtedly contain natural and cultural resource values of great significance. However, they are already, as pointed out earlier, administered for conservation purposes by the Forest Service. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act provides that the United States Forest Service is responsible for conduct of river studies on rivers flowing over national forest lands. We recommend that this practice be continued, and that is that the Forest Service study the Smith and Middle Fork Judith Rivers and Rock Creek rather than the Secretary of Interior, which I believe the bill calls for. The Yellowstone River study, which we support, should be a joint study between the National Park Service and Forest Service. And that concludes my testimony. I'd like to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ravenel, any questions?
Yeah, I've got one for Mr. Remus. Mr. Remus, who in your organization really is in overall charge of the cutting that has been going on in the ancient forests out there in the Northwest?
Well, the chief of the Forest Service is responsible for the programs that are carried out. John Lowe is the regional forester in Region 6 and would be responsible to the chief with regard to that.
The reason I ask you that is, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I went out to, and of course, this area is not affected by this legislation, but it's kind of parallel. And I went out and took a look at the cutting that was going on in the national forest surrounding the Olympic National Park. Have you ever seen that operation out there?
Yes, I've been on the ground and seen some of the harvest on those and other national forests.
Yes, sir. Well, quite frankly, I was unprepared for the devastation that I saw out there. What y'all are doing, permitting to be done out there in the Olympic National Forest is really a crime against nature. Those slopes out there are very severe. We saw in some areas the logs can only be lifted out by helicopter. They clear cut everything right up to the borders of the park, as you know. And where they could use bulldozers, they did, or fire, and they burned what rubble is left. And the erosion from the rains is just, scarred those slopes, those severe slopes where those marvelous, wonderful trees used to exist. The little streams are all stopped up with mud and silt. And I just wanted to, just take this opportunity. I do it at every instance. If I had not been there myself and seen it, I would not have believed that an agency of the United States government could, permit such an outrage to be perpetrated. I just want to tell you that.
Well, I appreciate your concern and recognize that when you look at an area that's been harvested by whatever means, that it does have a severe aspect to it. We have been strongly committed to the reforestation. I think that you're aware that our policies have moved strongly away from clear cutting because of the kinds of effects that it's had. With regard to the Pacific Northwest, as Congressman Smith could tell you, there's been a dramatic change in the direction. The President's plan for this area is much more protective. It has been based on the best scientific information we have, and we're moving in a way that I think is responsible with regard to the ecosystem considerations in that area. And I feel confident that the kind of management that we will have in the future will meet the kinds of concerns that you have.
Yes, sir. Of course, when you cut an area like that, and then you replant, you do not restore the biological diversity of the fauna in that of the flora in that area. I mean, what you do is you can convert an area of great floral diversity to really, which is just then a tree farm.
Well, yes, I understand, and you're correct that when you've harvested in an old growth area, it has changed, and the new plans are protecting more old growth than we had envisioned in the past. Also, other areas are still devoted to timber harvest in the Pacific Northwest, will continue to be harvested for products and be reforested. We do need a mosaic of lands. When you look at the landscape, they should not all be harvested. Land should be protected, and there is a significant acreage in wilderness. Other lands can be used for other purposes. The important thing, and as what we're trying to do as we look to the future, is to look at a mosaic of the land on a broad scale and choose those management practices and those uses that meet both the needs of the present and future generations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vogel, member of the Agriculture Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions, Mr. Rammers. One is that, is the Forest Service changed their methodology of management of our national forests within the last 5 years?
Yes, I think significantly the kind of direction that was broadcast, you might say, in 1992 with regard to reduction in clear cutting and an emphasis on ecosystem management. That's not to say that that didn't occur in places in the past. I was trained as a young forester in the principles of silviculture and ecosystems, and so it's a long-standing history within the natural resources, but the emphasis in looking at broad landscapes and across multiple boundaries, as even this bill suggests, is very important. When you think about an ecosystem, you can think at it at all scales, and it is important that we consider both the broad scale and the more specific scale. And so, yes, there's been significant change and a major emphasis on looking at the broad scale, as we've done with the President's plan, as we're doing with the salmon, as we've done with individual species under the Endangered Species Act.
The next thing that I'd like to ask you about is, as you have developed within the Forest Service this new management process, have anyone came up with knowledge as to whether or not we know everything we need to know about our forest ecosystem, or do we need additional knowledge and research into the ecosystems?
Need major new knowledge. The chief would be the first to point out that we're still learning. We need to learn. He's emphasized accelerated research. One of the major modes in the Pacific Northwest is adaptive management, in which we not only look at new management, but we monitor and evaluate.
When we first had the original first Jack Ward Thomas report on the spotted owl, and then following that, the Pope Gang of Four report, one of the things in my discussions with the scientists who brought up those reports was our lack of knowledge, the so much lack of knowledge, that so much research and everything and understanding that we need to do in order to perform better. Is that right?
That's correct. That's right.
And sometimes some people come up with what I call simplistic answers to very complex problems within a national forest. And I'm afraid that some of those people are not fully knowledgeable of how much knowledge we don't know about our national forests. You don't have to comment on that. You don't have to comment. That's my comment. And that the other thing that some people think that if we just don't cut the trees and we do nothing else, that the forests then are going to be in a natural state. But we do other things within those national forests, or we don't permit other things to happen that happen in nature that makes a change in that forest. What about fires? Do we just permit the fires to continue to burn and burn and burn wherever they start? That's nature. Do we permit that?
No, we don't. One of the dramatic things that we're learning is that all ecosystems, even in wilderness or whether they're managed, are subject to the conditions of fire, the concerns for fire protection, the concerns of insect and disease attack, And so in any given setting with any kind of mosaic, you need to look at the management practices that will best accomplish the public's objectives.
So what we have is that we are already interrupting nature's ecosystem with other management that is dictated, in my opinion, by the fact that we do have people living within these forests. We have in-holdings, we have cities around and things, that we're just not going to permit a huge conflagration that may have occurred 100 years ago or 75 or 200 or 500 years ago, when, like in the Northwest up in Region 6, a large part of it was completely destroyed by fire. We're not going to permit that anymore, are we? We're not going to permit the cities of Salem, Oregon, and other places just to burn down in order to preserve an ecosystem.
That's right, and many people, as they think of the national forest, think of it as if it was a blocked-up ownership, but that's not the case. In the history of our country, many of the prime farmlands within a national forest boundary are in private ownership. There's private ownership of forested lands, and we have to manage in a way that respects our adjacent landowners and provides them protection, as well as those lands that are federal resources.
Right. And insects and fire, just like forests, don't stop at forest boundaries. And we have national forests that are adjacent to private forests and state forests. And therefore, if we're going to do something about insect population, we can't just do it one place and not another and to control insect population, do we?
No, both our insect and disease and fire programs have to be cooperative programs with state and local authorities.
Mr. Chairman, could I have just a little more time? Now let's look at the state of Montana just for a few more minutes. And as one who has worked with that Montana delegation to try and work out a wilderness legislation for it, and as one who's had many hearings on that state, I find that, if my memory serves me right, there's a lot of land in Montana that is forest land in the Rockies that is owned by private concerns, and one major private concern. Is that not correct?
Yes, there's significant land, forested land in Montana in a number of private ownerships.
A lot of that goes back to the days when they had the railroads through and one quarter went one place,
That's right.
one quarter went public, one quarter went
ownership.
private. So we have a checkerboard approach, do we not?
That's correct.
And a lot of those lands up there that have been clear-cut by those private companies, and that one major private company. Is that correct?
That's correct.
This legislation in no way addresses that problem, does it?
As the Congresswoman indicated, if the bill only applies to federal land, it wouldn't deal with any of those questions on private land.
Correct. So since there's a checkerboard approach and we're taking an ecosystem approach, how do you take an ecosystem approach to an area where you're still permitting all this clear cutting to occur?
Well, one of our difficulties as we look at any ecosystem is the relationship with private land and private owners. And in the West, to a large measure, that is, any controls on those lands are subject to state law or local law, not to federal law.
What I'm trying to get to is that there's no question that the Forest Service is right now going down the right road of taking the ecosystem approach, but it's just not that easy to do it. It's not simplistic because of the multifaceted problems, the complexities that are caused by land ownership in various areas, by suppressions, fires and disease and other things that naturally occur. And so if you're going to have an ecological approach, then you have to take those things into consideration, do you not?
That's correct.
And so adjustments have to be made to the natural ecosystem that is not occurring, because natural ecosystem is not occurring.
One of our greatest difficulties in the area that this bill addresses is the historic role of fire and the fact in order to protect the forest lands, we've protected it, and the conditions have changed from what they would have been before the fire control occurred. But it's still necessary, and we have to learn how to deal and work with an ecosystem under a changed circumstance.
Now, the gentleman from Oregon that I'm looking at right now, and has worked with me on much of this legislation, knows full well, because I've been out through all of these states and visited and spent a great deal of time, probably more than people in my district appreciate. But one of the things that I have found as a result of, I'd say, some approaches to management of areas where you have diseased, dead trees, like in eastern Oregon, that we now have a massive buildup of dead wood that could lead to conflagration. Is that correct?
That's right. That's a major concern.
And if that conflagration does occur, that the heat from that conflagration is so great that that soil is going to be dead. Is that correct?
Yeah, the heat could down into the soil kill the microorganisms and other things.
And then the gentleman from the Carolinas was talking about mud and everything else. There's going to be a whole bunch of it if they get the rains. Now, the problem is they probably ain't going to get the rains. Maybe they have dry desert out there. But these are some of the problems as I see it with a, quote, ecosystem approach, just without really studying an ecosystem approach to management. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? We need to move along. If you'll hold your questions short as you can, we'll appreciate it. We've got another panel after this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reimers, I've been impressed with the size of this land area that we're talking about. I represent an area of Virginia that has about 5,000 square miles, about the size of the state of Connecticut. The federal government owns in national forest land about 1/3 of that land, about 1,500 square miles, 1 million acres. Here at 16 million acres, we're talking about more than 25,000 square miles of land, larger than the state of South Carolina, that we're going to completely lock up from any use by people in the area. This is, in my district, forestry products between furniture that we all use, that we're sitting on here today, paper products that we're all using here today, houses that we all live in. It's the second largest source of employment in my district from all those uses of timber. And if we were to shut off any access to all access to public land for that purpose, we would have a devastating impact on our economy, and it would put tremendous pressure on the privately owned land, which would have to be the sole source of any timber supply. Two questions in regard to that. First, what impact is this going to have economically on this region of these 5 states?
Well, we haven't done a complete analysis of all the impacts of designation of these corridors in this amount of wilderness. We haven't had those kind of detailed maps or been asked by the committee to do that kind of a broad analysis. But clearly, our preference is to be able to look at these roadless lands, say for instance they're in these corridors, look at them in conjunction with the adjacent national forest, and allow to both protect the ecosystem but also allow a flow of goods and services from those lands. And so there would be effects on production of timber. It would have effect on mills. We don't have any overall calculation of the magnitude of that effect. I think the greater concern would be that we need to be able to manage these national forests and groups of national forests in a comprehensive way rather than taking specific corridors or other lands and putting them in special categories. Now, we acknowledge that Congress designates wilderness and designates wild and scenic rivers, but the National Forest Management Act prescribes that we would manage the rest of those lands, including the wilderness and the wild and scenic rivers, in a composite way to best meet the public's needs and provide benefits.
The second part of that is, my understanding is that as opposed to the national parks, the national forests were created for a diversity of uses, including renewable natural resources. And last year there was a lot of discussion in the administration that concerned me about cutting off all timber sales in 56 different national forests. That I understand the administration has not proceeded with, and I think that is wise, that 2 of the national forests in my state would have been, again, heavily impacted by that decision. But what effect does it have on the economy when we discontinue in a dramatic way the availability of our public lands as a source of forestry products on private lands and on the overall economy of the country?
Well, the situation in large measure varies from place to place and state to state. In some cases, you can make a shift to private lands, and the harvest continues.
Well, can I ask a question? I'm sorry y'all are having difficulties, but roadless areas is only applies to federal lands. Is that not correct, Mr. Reimers?
That's the only place we've inventoried it. I mean, it could be inventoried on private lands, and there could be.
Yeah.
But
okay. So. Yeah.
Specifically said uninventoried roadless land.
Okay.
Therefore, it could very well include all the private.
Well, then I would think it would be very easy to correct that. It certainly, from my conversation with the co-sponsors, is that this was not to apply to Louisiana, to North Carolina, or to any place that didn't have a national forest in it. It was to apply to the federally owned lands, and that should be clarified.
You know, Neil, I know South that it doesn't apply to Louisiana. And it doesn't apply to South Carolina or New York, California, but it also does.
It's only federal lands.
I have a concern that where it does
States
apply,
first.
the states of Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming, it reaches out to include non-inventory roadless land without an exception for private land ownership, and specifically provides nothing shall occur on it, virtually nothing, until Congress specifically allows it.
Well,
It seems to me to be a broad restriction, and a broadening of the delineated wilderness protection, just well beyond account.
on page 32 of the bill, line 3, 4, 5, and 6, the provisions of this section shall apply only to lands under the jurisdiction of the United States Forest Service.
I'm reading the next section.
Okay.
While I agree with that section you just read, is an exception for private lands covered by language in that section. Go to page 34, you got an entirely new section.
Yep.
That is broad in scope without such a private land ownership exception. And as I read it, extends an absolute prohibition of activity under this act to include private land, including the so-called roadless land area.
Well, as it says in the Bible, let not your heart be troubled. If this bill comes to a markup, I would offer an amendment to correct that to meet your concerns.
Well, I think, however, remains troubled by other very big concerns, such as whether or not all the exempted roads are properly exempted. My heart remains troubled by the expanse, as does apparently the department, is concerned about the expansive nature of this and the effect of the authorities upon private land use, where traditionally people have lived and raised their families for generations. When I'm going to tell them you're in a corridor, suddenly the government has a bigger interest in your land than you have. I have deep concerns, Mr. Chairman, and I think those concerns are echoed by the agency. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? If not, we'd like to call our next panel and thank our witnesses for being here. Our next panel. Yes, sir.
If I may, just very shortly.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I think...
Is your mic on?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I think the gentleman from Virginia put his finger on this issue, and I want to ask Mr. Reimers a question after I background it just for a moment. Historically, the Northwest has provided about 50% of the softwoods for American uses. Currently, with the Option 9 and the current practices, that has been dropped to about 10%, but the 10% is not harvestable because it's in the courts, so we're harvesting literally no timber from public lands. State of Washington, for instance, has 60% private lands, 40% public lands. Oregon is just the reverse, 40% private, 60% public. Unlike the states of North Carolina, South Carolina, Missouri, Virginia, and others who came into this union owning most of their land, most of the land in the West is owned by the federal government. We made a bad deal. The result was that this is an area that's producing and has most of the country's wood. That is not available today, and we've seen the result. With escalating lumber prices and with the source of timber available for the use of this country from other parts of the world, very difficult to identify. I'm getting to the question, Mr. Reimers. Our headlong effort to protect public lands at all costs, tie it up, has resulted in this, Mr. Chairman. It's resulted in a clear cut of the private lands in the West to keep up with the market and to sell those logs to anybody at the highest bidder. What has that done to the environment, Mr. Chairman? The gentleman from Missouri has accurately identified the patchwork kind of ownership in the West. If you protect one section and the result of your protection is to clear cut the next one to it, what have you done for the overall ecological problems that we all talk about? You've destroyed it. So, my question to Mr. Reimers, have you witnessed an increased harvest from private lands in the West, and what, in your opinion, has that done to the ecological balance that Jack Ward Thomas and all the philosophers want to achieve?
I can't really answer the question. I recognize that there's been some increased harvest on private lands, and we continue to be dependent on supplies from Canada. And so obviously, to the degree that we're still consuming, timber is being harvested, and that has some of the same concerns for we, the people of the United States, as the concerns that we've had on some of our public lands. And so we have to be concerned about the condition of all lands and how we protect a reasonable environment and meet our needs for products.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just one more statement. Bills like this and our other efforts to try to protect the great ecological problems in the West, in my opinion, I'll predict you'll be sitting here, likely I won't, you'll be sitting here when this committee will be trying to determine how in the hell can we control logging on private lands, because you want to protect the ecology of the area. You'll be doing this, and I dread the thought of it, but it will happen. So this will come down to a private-public battle about who and how the federal government should manage private lands.
The gentleman here just for that, there's no question that to put the pressure on the private lands. And the gentleman will remember, back when we were debating and working our way through on Region 5 and 6, and then we saw the export of logs to the Far East from the private lands, that there were attempts and discussions by some members to stop that export from private lands. Well, remember? In other words, that they even wanted to go and say that we should stop that private individual from the use of his property in order to protect public property. Of course, we rejected that.
I'm going to take the last question because we got to move on, and it's just a short one for Mr. Reimers. And I'm not sure I know the total answer to this, if the charge for cutting in these public lands was at actual cost to the government instead of at a reduced rate, would they be cutting?
Well, I guess the question is if we put some sort of a floor under it. I mean, the timber is offered competitively and bid on competitively, and so it bears the market cost to the degree it can. Now, the question that's been behind the below-cost sales type of controversy is the amount that we may expend in terms of preparing a sale for sale, and if those costs exceeded what we get when we sell it.
There's a rather large debate on that.
Yeah,
you understand?
3 to 1.
And you don't agree that the cash expenditures have exceeded cash receipts by a ratio of about 3 to 1 on average over the past decade?
No, I wouldn't agree in terms of our whole system. In terms of all lands, there are forests, when you look at a program on a forest, that you look at our costs have exceeded what we take in. Under ecosystem management, though, there's going to be less concentration on that kind of a relationship and a greater concentration on forest health.
Okay. Well, I was just asking a narrow question. The Congressional Budget Office domestic discretionary spending, page 121, says cash expenditures have exceeded cash receipts by a ratio of about 3 to 1 on average over the past decade. So the thought occurs to me, if you cut out those kinds of sales, i.e. stop them, as you would if you put this land in a wilderness area, or the ecosystem protection that the Ecosystem Protection Act contemplates, that you would actually save money. That seems to be why the National Taxpayers Group was supporting this legislation. I'm just probing. I'm not a co-sponsor of this bill. I'm trying to look at it from all sides. But wouldn't the government be better off financially? I mean, all these other results could occur that Mr. Smith's worried about, and I share his concerns, but wouldn't the government in a cash position be better off if there were no cutting?
I don't believe so.
Why not?
Well, I need to look at the specific page that you have there and provide...
Well, it's 121 of the discretionary domestic spending, chapter 3.
So, gentlemen, the chairman yield on that. Maybe I can help clarify a minute.
But let me ask you, would you get back to me with a letter, explaining why you don't agree but are not sure why you don't agree?
Well, Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Volkmer, I'll yield to you.
Well, doesn't that apply to all of our national forests?
Sure.
Not just those encompassed in the bill?
No, I think
7 of the 9 national forests.
this is National Forest System regions. In 7 of the 9 National Forest System regions, annual cash receipts from federal...
7 of what 9? What 7?
For example, in 3 of these so-called...
How many are west of the Mississippi and how many are east of the Mississippi?
For example, in 3 of these so-called below-cost timber sale regions, the Rocky Mountain, Northern, and Intermountain cash expenditures have exceeded cash receipts by a ratio of 3 to 1. On average, over the past decade, annual timber program costs in the 3 regions still exceed annual timber receipts if the Forest Service expenditures for road constructions are excluded.
Are excluded?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm just quoting the
I mean, you can do a lot of things with accounting. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair,
I'm not...
gentlemen yield to me.
Yeah, briefly, but then let's go to the next panel. I'm not trying to start a debate. I just...
understand.
Well, go ahead.
I just want to help with some numbers, Mr. Chairman. I have some documents in front of me,
Well, won't you...
which I will offer for the record.
Let's put them in the record at this point,
Yes.
please.
And I think they refute that number simply because I have Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho here. And of the 10 forests in Idaho, 5 are below cost, in Wyoming 4, in Idaho 2 of 10, in Oregon and Washington, 2 of 30. So the point is, the forests east of the Mississippi River are the forests that are below cost. But be careful when you say we ought to make them full cost, because the Forest Service does many more things than just harvest timber, Mr. Chairman. Provides a hell of a lot of jobs, provides a hell of a lot of resource for people. So before we put all these in one bag, let's identify exactly what we mean.
I totally agree with you, and I thank the gentleman for understanding that about the tobacco growers in my state. Yes, you're absolutely right about workers that get displaced, and I thank the gentleman. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. The next panel will be Ms. Carol King, entertainer from Stanley, Idaho, and member of the board of the Alliance for the Wild Rockies, North Hollywood, California, accompanied by Mr. Michael Bader, Alliance for the Wild Rockies, Missoula, Montana, Dr. John J. Craighead, Professor Emeritus of Zoology and Forestry at University of Montana and founder of the Wildlands Institute, Missoula, Montana, Dr. Lee Metzger, Chairman, Department of Wildlife Biology, Department of Zoology, University of Montana, and Michael Garrity, University of Utah, Salt Lake City. We're very happy to have all of you here, and our first witness will be Mrs. I felt the earth move under my feet, King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask a question before my testimony. It was our understanding that Mr. Bader would be testifying on his own. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you very much. As you've stated, I'm an entertainer and a resident of Idaho. I'm a member of the board of the Alliance for the Wild Rockies, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation of ecosystems in the Northern Rockies. I've been involved in wilderness protection since the early 80s. I've worked with environmentalists, industry, news media, members of Congress, staff, and people in general. I want to begin by introducing 2 photos into the record.
Without objection, they'll be made part of the file of this committee hearing.
Thank you. These photos show, better than words, the contrast between wilderness and development, and I hope that all the members of this committee will avail themselves of the opportunity to see that contrast. NREPA has 58 co-sponsors so far, across party lines, who realize this bill is necessary for the health of the environment, species, and the economy. We hope to educate all of Congress eventually, and to that end, we very much appreciate this forum, and Mr. Chairman, we thank you, and we thank Mr. Chairman Studs as well. NREPA was drafted by scientists and biologists from the region. It is the first ecosystem bill ever. It represents the most state-of-the-art, comprehensive scientific approach to public lands legislation based on natural boundaries as opposed to the old state-by-state approach, where wilderness was designated as scattered islands in a sea of development. Caribou, bears, and bull trout don't know when they've crossed a state line. They only know when their cover and food supply are gone. By then, it's too late. Of the forests that once covered America, only 5% remain intact, but we can still save some. We can save some cover, some food supply, and endangered species in the Northern Rockies, because it is the largest viable ecosystem in the lower 48. NREPA will protect the wilderness required for the survival of all the native plant and animal species, any one of which could be vital to the survival of human beings, as the yew tree has been in the treatment of ovarian cancer. Areas designated as wilderness by NREPA are among the most pristine in America, and every area so designated meets the legal requirements for wilderness as prescribed by the Wilderness Act of 1964. Biologically sound, NREPA is also economically sound. A study done by Dr. Thomas Power, chair of the economics department at the University of Montana, shows why NREPA is good for the economic health of the region. It shows how NREPA safeguards a multi-billion-dollar tourist industry, preserving high-quality jobs such as outfitters, guides, merchants, sellers of fishing, hunting, mountaineering, hiking and photography gear, saddle makers, motel owners, craftspeople, mom-and-pop grocery stores. These are jobs held by many of my neighbors in Idaho. The Powell report shows wilderness to be the best economic base for the region, ensuring a high quality of life and attracting new businesses, generating even more economic opportunity for local citizens. NREPA will create jobs in wildland recovery. It will also save taxpayers the over $185 million a year now allocated for money-losing timber sale programs. The National Taxpayers Union agrees with this part of NREPA, and I'd like to introduce their letter of support into the record. Thank you. Extractive industries have declined in the region because of factors other than wilderness, including automation, export of raw materials, overuse, and mismanagement. As people realize this, support for NREPA is growing. It's broad and diverse, from fishing and hunting coalitions to the Humane Society, from the Sierra Club, whose letter of support I'd also like to introduce into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. From the Sierra Club to the National Taxpayers Union. Former President Jimmy Carter has also written a letter of support, which was introduced by the Congresswoman. As for people in the region, I have a survey that I would like to introduce into the record. It is a survey that the Forest Service conducted themselves, and I don't know that they were particularly happy with the result, but it is a legitimate survey done by people of their choice that show that more than 2/3 of the people in the region want more wilderness and oppose any logging in roadless areas. 2/3, more than 2/3. NREPA clearly represents the national public interest, and these people know it. As for special interests, the timber industry and others have run public lands policy too long. I've worked on this issue for many years, and I believe NREPA is right for the nation and for the region. 58 of your colleagues agree. NREPA must become law. The scientific and economic evidence is there. If you can put politics aside and look at the merits, you will see NREPA is the only way to ensure the biological and economic survival of the Northern Rockies and all its species, including Homo sapiens. This bill is a well-thought-out, well-planned, well-prepared bill.
The Alliance is more than 500 businesses and organizations and over 5,000 individuals. The first step in intelligent tinkering is to save all the parts. Aldo Leopold, the father of modern wildlife management, said this nearly 50 years ago. This legislation heralds a new era in public lands management. We strongly support the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act, or NREPA. Representative Maloney and the 58 co-sponsors deserve praise. This bill charts a new course for public lands management and implements designations with consideration of their role as part of a larger ecological region. Importantly, it departs from the traditional state-by-state approach, which fragments the landscape and is highly partisan and political. NREPA enjoys both a strong scientific foundation and bipartisan support. Based upon the principles of conservation biology, NREPA outlines a process for halting the decline of ecosystems in the Northern Rockies and begins the climb back to full ecosystem recovery. NREPA's designations act in concert to ensure ecosystem integrity and economic sustainability. The Northern Rockies are truly a national treasure. Millions visit each year, enjoying the national forests and parks such as Yellowstone and Glacier. The Northern Rockies are America's Serengeti, with more than 300 vertebrate species. Most of the biological parts that Leopold spoke of remain, yet the key indicators of ecosystem health and stability are on the threatened and endangered species list, with more headed that way. I know from my days as a National Park Ranger in Yellowstone that the situation on the ground is extremely serious. Industrial giants have their way with our region because we're sparsely populated and therefore politically weak. Only by elevating this issue to national stature can we hope to protect the best of our rich American wilderness heritage. We commend you for your leadership in beginning the process of debate and refinement and eventual passage with the signature of the President. NREPA is sorely needed, for the management of this national treasure, held in the public trust, has been nothing short of criminally negligent. There's extensive evidence of wrongdoing, including the sworn testimony before Congress of former Northern Rockies Regional Forester John Mumma, who testified he was bullied out of office because he wouldn't implement the logging levels contained in the Forest Service forest plans. These cut levels violate federal environmental laws. If you look at this satellite view of the Kootenai National Forest, you could see it should be retitled a worked over national forest. It's more logged over than the Amazon we've heard so much about. To make matters worse, the reduction in timber cutting on the northwest coast has resulted in pressure moving into the Northern Rockies. Our region was set aside as a trading chip during the 1980s, and we don't accept it. The same old billion board foot plans are haunting us and driving the process. We expected changes in the way the Forest Service does business, but what we've observed has been the same old Forest Service and the same old business as usual. If you think the spotted owl crisis is bad, you haven't seen anything yet. The Northern Rockies are approximately 18 species on the federal list of threatened and endangered species. There are approximately 47 other species which are highly eligible for adding to the list. The states of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming list an additional 97 species as critically imperiled, and in Montana alone there are 397 plant species of special concern, meaning their existence is threatened. Yet more than 20 years after passage of the Endangered Species Act, not a single acre of critical habitat has been designated for any of these species. Not a single acre. A species-by-species approach is costly. The grizzly recovery plan carries a price tag of $26 million, not counting the millions spent since 1975. The wolf plan estimates a minimum of $6 million and possibly more. The salmon plans will cost tens of millions, as will bull trout, caribou. I think you get the picture. However, the Congress now has an unprecedented opportunity to save hundreds of species and hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars all at the same time. NREPA, with its multi-species approach, will not only prevent the extinction of numerous species, it does so in the most cost-effective manner. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record a paper on how NREPA bolsters the Endangered Species Act and reduces the workload now swamping federal wildlife managers. We've heard the Forest Service oppose this plan. They continue to support illegal and outdated plans. However, NREPA is national interest legislation that implements the will of the people. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the official record the official transcripts of a public hearing held in Missoula, Montana, where more than 95% of those attending supported NREPA, as well as a list of over 600 businesses and organizations in support of NREPA. Despite the political minefield, there's ample reason to hope we can enact this legislation. A new American conservation ethic is emerging based upon the best our rich conservation heritage has to offer. The Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act encompasses a large area and a big vision. Indeed, the late Western writer Wallace Stegner described the West as the geography of hope. We believe he's right. And I thank you again for the opportunity to present this testimony before the distinguished committees here today, and appreciate your concern and attention to this important matter. Thank you.
Dr. John Craighead, Professor Emeritus of Zoology and Forestry, University of Montana. I would ask that your whole statements will be made a part of the record. If it's possible to cut them down to hit the high points, that's fine, but that's up to you. Most of you have kept your statements very short, which we appreciate, but I have to physically leave here in 30 minutes, so just proceed accordingly.
Mr. Chairman, honorable committee members, I'm John Craighead, retired ecologist. In the course of a long professional career, I was active in helping to enact the National Wilderness Act and to envision and help on the formulation of the National Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and the Endangered Species Act. On several occasions, I testified before congressional committees on behalf of these landmarks of environmental legislation. It was testimony in support of good and visionary causes. Today, I am testifying in support of H.R. 2638, the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act, and I appreciate this opportunity. It is a privilege and an honor. The Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act is not a fly-by-night concept, nor is it the irresponsible dream of way-out environmentalists, as some critics would have us believe. It is rather the conservation wave of the future, a well-considered plan that has emerged from the nation's conservation successes and its failures of the past. The NREPA is a concept that has a long evolutionary history. It was born when the first national park was created, and the concept grew in scope and in attainability with the establishment of the National Wildlife Refuge System, the National Forest, the National Wilderness System, the National Wild and Scenic River System, and the Endangered Species Preservation Act, all directed toward using, yet preserving through wise management, wild America for the benefit of all Americans. These historic steps in the recognition and preservation of natural resources emerged spontaneously and piecemeal at the grassroots level of our society. Each step invariably led to the next. Each made portions of our natural resource heritage more secure. Most, if not all, were initially opposed by the governing status quo, but strongly advocated by a responsive public. Ideally, these incremental steps to protect our natural resources might have led to a comprehensive, holistic policy of sustainable resource preservation and management. For many reasons, they have not been fully successful in doing this. It has taken time, experience, and acquired knowledge to recognize that the landscape of the Mountain West is an entity that in the best interest of all Americans must be understood and managed as one unit. We must manage the sum of the parts, not just pieces by itself, as we have done in the past. The policies of the various federal resource management agencies, although wise and visionary for their time, have proven inadequate to the task. They have been contradictory and divisive within and between agencies. Interagency cooperation has not been strong enough to rectify these differences. The result has been to fracture rather than to unify the management of a common resource base, which is the foundation of our economic system. In the Northern Rockies, we have learned that to preserve the pristine elements of our environment and to guide and control our economic development, we must understand the biological as well as the human components and social complexities of large ecosystems and in turn of entire bioregions of which they are a part. The NREPA is the vehicle for accomplishing this. It will provide protection to large areas of unroaded de facto wilderness within the region, and it will direct that these areas and established wilderness be managed in context with the larger portion of the region embracing human communities and extractive economies. It will set the stage for holistic resource management. More than just the next step in the management of our natural resources, it represents the beginning of a new conservation era, one that will require new learning, new insight, and greater cooperation among federal agencies and the public to attain common goals. It is a concept whose time has come. Like all our major conservation movements, it will be at first an experiment, an ongoing experiment that can result in sustainable management of extractive resources while preserving the biodiversity of our wildlands ecosystems.
Can I interrupt you there? I need to take about a 5-minute recess. Ms. Reno just called me. I don't think I'm in trouble, but I got to call her right back. So she needs to talk to me right now. Y'all just rest at ease for about 5 minutes. I'm going in the back, and I'll be right back. Subcommittee will resume its sitting. Thank you for that. Please, Mr. Craighead, Dr. Craighead, your whole statement is going to be a part of the record. Yours too, Mr. Metzger, and yours too, Dr. Metzger, and yours, Mr. Garrity. If you can skip around or hit maybe the high points, the whole thing is going to be printed in the record. But do as you please.
Thank you, sir. The technical science to carry out this grand concept is at hand. Space-age technology and the computer information revolution have made it possible. And I would like to enter into the record, if I may, some papers indicating the progress we've made in that direction. It would be a grievous mistake to support or to create temporary resource-related employment at the expense of the resource capital that future generations will require. An old era is phasing out amid cries of anguish, and a new era is emerging amid visions of hope. I want to commend Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney of New York for sponsoring this legislation, and I urge you to take the long view, the national view, by supporting Congressman Maloney's and her co-sponsors by enacting H.R. 2638 into law. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Craighead. Dr. Lee Metzger, Chairman, Department of Wildlife Biology, Department of Zoology, University of Montana.
Thank you, Chairman Rose. My name is Lee Metzger, and I have been an ecologist and a wildlife biologist at the University of Montana for over a quarter of a century, and served as chairman of zoology and director of wildlife biology during that time. My area of specialty is population dynamics with special emphasis on large mammals and especially threatened and endangered species. I wish to thank Chairman Rose and Chairman Studs for the opportunity to speak today on the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act. I think that the act is timely, it is desperately needed, and it's a visionary piece of legislation. And I would like to congratulate Congresswoman Maloney for introducing this legislation. I understand that my written testimony will be entered into the written record, and so I would like to just make some abbreviated comments to try and emphasize what I think are some very, very critical points. And there are about 5 simple points that I wish to emphasize. One is that the Northern Rockies ecosystem contains the only intact fauna and flora of the lower 48 states. It's absolutely unique. It's a small piece of our wildlands heritage that is valued by the American people no matter where they live, and that represents a piece of our heritage that we must preserve for future generations. It may also be the world's best opportunity to preserve one small, intact fragment of temperate forests worldwide. So this is a natural resource, not just of essential national importance, but of worldwide importance. My written testimony tries to provide key scientific references and documentation for each of the points, so I won't take time to do that now. It's hard to imagine what has happened in this portion of the lower 48 states. I have lived there for almost 3 decades. When I went there 3 decades ago, it did not look like that satellite picture over there. That area was almost continuous unroaded forest at that time. What has happened in this area boggles the imagination and challenges any ecosystem devastation worldwide. The fauna in this area is intact only because there were large black blocks of wildlands that existed until very recently. In fact, I would argue, and I think the evidence suggests convincingly, that this landscape can no longer support the intact fauna. I think that development, especially logging, has gone so far in this area that the grizzly bear, the gray wolf, lynx, perhaps other animals, are doomed to eventual extinction unless strong matter or strong protection is extended in the very near future. So my second point is that this treasure is in fact truly endangered, and I certainly don't share the optimism that was delivered in some of the earlier testimony today. Thirdly, I would like to argue that we know what this resource will require for its preservation. And I think that the science that we have that comes from conservation biology gives us some surprising results. And one of those results is that we will need more landscape preserved than we had previously thought. And probably, there are several lines of evidence outlined in my written testimony that argue, I think very convincingly, that something on the order of 50,000 square miles must be cohesively managed. It doesn't all have to be preserved, but it must be managed in a series of blocks and corridors that can provide a landscape for the indefinite persistence of the large carnivores that still occupy this area. That contrasts with some of the testimony that you heard earlier, and I think that the recent record of our land and game management agencies does not give us reason for optimism. There is no plan that our agencies have generated that creates a landscape within which these organisms can persist. If it did, they would propose that there are no new roads. They would propose habitat rehabilitation in key areas. They would have a series of blocks and corridors that encompass some 50,000 square miles. In fact, a plan, if it existed amongst our agencies that was competent to preserve this treasure, would look like NREPA. That plan does not exist in any place other than in this proposed legislation. Finally, I would like to argue that a plan to preserve these organisms is in fact realistic, that it can be done, that the landscape is there. With modest rehabilitation, we can create a landscape within which these organisms can persist. And I think that NREPA, the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act, in fact realistically does propose a comprehensive and visionary plan for doing that. So I would like to again congratulate Congresswoman Maloney for this visionary piece of legislation, and at the end of the testimony I would be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
I want to intervene now and let our colleague from California, Congressman Farr, make a statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to come here today as a member of this committee. I also serve on the Natural Resources Committee and heard the testimony in that, and I came here really to alert the committee as to a concern that I think is raised with the issues being developed in this legislation. And it's a concern that stems from two aspects. First is the economics. As we look at this country's future and we see where we are going, we have to start beginning to manage our resources in the best economic fashion. And I think we're going to have to change a lot of the assumptions that we have made, which is that the best historic fashion was to mine the resources, to exploit them, and to not necessarily maintain renewability of them. This country is moving from a manufacturing country to a service industry, and interesting enough, the economics of it is the largest service industry in the country is in tourism. And the largest growth in tourism is from people wanting to watch wildlife. Watchable wildlife brings more revenue than huntable wildlife. And what I am concerned about, and was raised in the Natural Resources Committee, is the Department of Agriculture that ought to be working with the author on this bill on how to improve the bill, has come out and imposed to the legislation in the Department of Forestry. And same thing with the Department of Interior. And what concerns me, and I hope, Mr. Chairman, you as chair of this committee with jurisdiction on this issue, will really bring to task our federal agencies that are not trying to help this committee and members of this House when they approach an issue as large as this one is.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I want to be very brief. I'm going to have to leave. And I would like to respond to the gentleman and also to some of the things that have been mentioned and insert for the record a couple of things if I might. First of all, in Ms. King's testimony, it was stated that the cost of this legislation, the savings, is $185 million. And we did talk, and the chairman was interested in the below-cost timber sales issue. I'd like to submit for the record the Forest Service accounts of their receipts and their expenditures in this region. I have the Region 1 figures here, and if we're allowed to keep the record open for 24 hours, we can give you the entire area here. This is most of the area, and of this portion, there were $89 million in receipts and $77 million in expenditures for a net revenue gain of over $12 million for this area. Secondly, Mr. Volkmer has asked me to submit for the record the numbers regarding the amount of public-owned forest land in the state of Montana, taking the currently used land, which is about 3.4 million acres that's already in wilderness, the 1.7 million acres which this committee voted, I believe yesterday or last week to put into wilderness, coupled with about 8 million acres that are included in this bill. Of the 15 million acres of forest land in Montana, this would leave just 3 million available for timbering. And I would say to the gentleman from California that I recognize the need for great diversity in the use of our national forest lands, but to tie up all of our lands and make it unavailable for what is a substantial portion of our economy that's used by all of us does not take that into account. And when we talk about below-cost timber sales, we forget about the added cost of nearly $5,000 per house that it currently costs for construction because of increasing costs in the timber industry with the reducing availability of public lands as a source of that, putting greater pressure on private lands, where we also have to be concerned about biodiversity and the ecological impact of forestry. It has to be soundly managed, but it also has to be spread around the country, including in this part of these 5 states. So I do thank you for forbearance and allowing me to put that in the record.
Without objection, all the materials the gentleman referred to will be a part of the record. Our next witness is Dr. Michael Garrity, University of Utah at Salt Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I teach natural resource economics at the University of Utah. I would first like to note that 60% of the road cost is not included by the Forest Service in their expenditures.
Would you stop and explain that a little?
They do not include the cost of the road base because they assume that the road will last indefinitely. So they amortize that over a period up to 2,000 years. So in that respect.
Okay. I got it.
Thank you. From my research, I have found that H.R. 2638 is a jobs-creating bill. People live and work in the Northern Rockies because of its natural beauty. The question of jobs versus the environment is a false one. These states would actually end up with more jobs if these lands were left in their natural state. NREPA will directly create 640 jobs by obliterating environmentally destructive roads. NREPA indirectly creates thousands of jobs by preserving a pristine environment which attracts and holds businesses. This natural landscape is the economic base of the Northern Rockies states. These states' current economic vitality is dependent on their high-quality natural environment, not their declining extractive industries. Further damage to these pristine areas will threaten the economic future of these areas. The number of timber jobs in these areas will continue to decline with technological advancement and the diminishing supply of trees. Capital technology is the main cause of fall in timber-related employment. NREPA offers a better solution to put people to work. NREPA proposes approximately 1 million acres in the national wildlife recovery areas. 10,000 miles of roads will be closed and removed, and fish and wildlife returned. These activities will employ people. Obliterating 10,000 miles of road will create approximately 640 jobs for heavy equipment operators. These are good jobs which could be spread out well into the 21st century. Heavy equipment operators earn approximately $22 an hour. The employment created by this method will greatly ease the transition from the timber-based economy. The money to pay for this could come from ending timber subsidies. Last year, the Forest Service lost over $185 million on logging sales in national forests covered by NREPA. As I pointed out, the Forest Service believes these roads are an asset. In actuality, they're a liability. 90% of the increase in siltation from logging comes from these roads. The state of Montana has found that logging roads are the main cause of stream degradation. In central Idaho, erosion rate along roads was 750 times greater than in undisturbed areas. The siltation from these roads is killing trout and salmon. Elk population directly declines with roads. The continued destruction of these lands will directly harm the elk hunting industry. The subsidized logging on these lands causes the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to spend more money to try and save the grizzly bear. In summary, I believe NREPA will protect the environment, create jobs, and save the taxpayers' money. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for very excellent testimony. The fact of your being here and who the people are that have co-sponsored this bill and who have signed, who have written in letters to support it is very impressive. You all have all done a very good job here. And are there any points that any of you would like to emphasize before we close the record here? Anything that you think we may have?
With your permission,
yes,
Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record a report by the chairman of the University of Montana, Thomas Power, detailing the effects on the timber industry if this bill was passed.
Without objection. Gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank all the people for coming here, too, because we do share some of the objectives of wanting to make sure this area is protected, but I, as you can tell, very much disagree with the approach that you're taking. One of the other comments, Ms. King, that you had in your testimony, and I don't have it right here in front of me, but if I can recall, you said that of the forest lands in this country, only 5% of the original forest lands are intact. I take it you're referring there to the original forest lands as opposed to current forest lands.
Yes, sir, I am.
Because in point of fact, we have more forest lands in this country today than when Native Americans or European Americans settled this country because of the fact that we fight forest fires. I suspect that much of the land in this part of the country that we're talking about, including some of the land that's in this proposed legislation, was grasslands at that time, and that forests have been allowed to grow up as I think they should because they're a renewable resource. In my district in Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, in the Allegheny Mountains, and the Blue Ridge Mountains, that area was a heavy mining area during the 19th century. Much of the Allegheny Mountains and the Blue Ridge Mountains were decimated by cutting down trees to create the smelting furnace for the iron industry. Well, in the early part of this century, the Mesabi iron ore range was discovered, and iron ore mining went out of business. And I can take you to parts of my congressional district where towns existed with hundreds of people living in them, where we now, you can, except for seeing a few rock foundations, you cannot tell that these were thriving communities at one time, but because they are replaced by 80 and 100-foot tall trees that have grown back up, have reclaimed the land. And if we manage the land properly, as we haven't always done, certainly didn't do it in my area a century ago, we can have both preservation of ecosystems and the kind of resources that we need as an economy, and not put pressure on private lands and not put pressure on lands in other countries when you still have this tremendous demand for forest products that we have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all very much. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I neglected to do so. I would like to request that a letter from approximately 50 scientists in support of the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act also be entered into the record as part of my testimony.
Without objection, so ordered. Dr. Craighead, Mr. Bader.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, there was one point made repeatedly that I think needs to be clarified, and I need to state this, that under this legislation, over half of all the federal lands in the area covered by this legislation will remain open to development, timber harvest, mining, and other development, and all of the private lands will remain open to development. And I also heard some concerns about lumber and things like that, and I'd like to just say that my father was a lumber salesman. Many of my family members are home builders, and they are member businesses of our alliance. I believe very strongly that we need to protect these forests, because these are not the forests that produce the kind of lumber that they require for building homes. And they have also noted to me on many occasions that the price of lumber has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not people build homes, but rather it's the interest rates that happen to be in effect at any given time. So I think that needs to be stated, and I appreciate you letting me add that in.
Thank you all very much. This hearing is adjourned.